It's Spoilerin time, ladies and gentlemen, and others. And we are going to spoil Deadwood, Season 1, Episode 10, in our continuing review. Although, I think at this point, they're new to me. I'm not sure about Brian. Counterpart, Episode 6 of Season 1, and the movie Annihilation. This is the show where we look at stuff that the Cordkillers show has allowed us to watch and talk about what we think about it. I'm Tom Merritt. Brian Brushwood, how you feeling?
I'm good. I just want to give another quick plug for game night. A non-spoilery review. Do me a favor, Tom. This is I rarely do this, but I'm going to cash in a coupon and say, as a friend, go watch it. Go watch it. Go watch it. Go watch it so we can talk about it. It's smart. It's really smart and funny. It's familiar territory. The conceit is dead simple, but imagine that the writers know what you're thinking and they're just one step ahead of you the entire time, and it's all light and fun fare. I loved it. Loved it.
But will I like it?
Let's talk about Annihilation.
All right. Yes. This is a movie based on the book by Jeff Vandermeer, which in another podcast called Sword and Laser, we read a couple of years ago now, I think. And I had no idea how they could turn this thing into a movie that would be watchable, because in the book, and I'm not spoiling anything from the book, it's all in Natalie Portman's character's head, in Lena's head. And it's all descriptions of how the stuff she sees makes her feel. And you know, there's descriptions of the stuff too, but I'm like, how is this going to work? I have to say, Brian, I'm very pleased that you like it, and for different reasons, because I was pleased that not only did this work as a story on film, and they did something I've seen in other adaptations where something that works out of chronological order in a book, they just put back into chronological order. They did that with Arrival as well, and it worked great. And that worked with Annihilation. But there were other parts where the scene where you see the body by the pond, I can't remember the character's name now, but it's the first woman to get killed.
Sure.
And she goes in search of her. As soon as they showed the pond, I was like, oh, I know what that is. I know where that is. She's gonna, like, I recognized stuff. I don't know how they did it, but there were things that I recognized before the movie told me what they were. It was amazing.
So the only negative feedback I've heard has been from two sides on Annihilation. There have been a few people who said, but the book, and that's not, you're not wrong. You know, it's like you experience something and you're seeing a pale shadow of it, but this is why Justin Robert Young and I are so vehement that it's like, always watch the movie, always watch the TV show first, because it is by definition going to be the worst version of the story.
I'm telling you, I didn't have that experience.
Great. That's great. That's wonderful. And now it makes me want to read the book so I could get even more of this experience. The other criticism on the other side has been that, I guess basically arguing from a place of ignorance, where like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
Oh, yeah. No, and I would expect that with a movie like Annihilation, that there are definitely going to be people who don't get it. And that's fine. You don't get it. The movie's not for you.
But for what it is, it was profound. It was as profound as 2001. It was as profound as Arrival. It was as profound as Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It has haunting, gorgeous, beautiful, disturbing vignettes that live in my mind like a dream I just can't shake.
Or like a mutating fungus.
Sure. But specifically, I was really taken by the talent of the artists collaborating in such unusual, strange ways to paint pictures in my mind that will live there forever. And we're not even getting into plot elements. I'm just talking about set pieces and so on. The idea of a bear with the face of a mutated rat, that when it screams in the voice of the person it last ate, is extraordinary and haunting and deeply disturbing. It's not just that I loved it, it's that I was profoundly affected by it. And I think that's the delight that I'm reveling in right now is, God damn it, a movie can still do this to me. It can still make me deeply uncomfortable. And also, it's not that everything went in order chronologically. They were all over the maps, but I like,
It was linear.
Yes.
They do some flashbacks.
Yeah,
the book is even more.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure the book is super duper insane, but we've now reached a period in cultural storytelling awareness in film that there's no longer a need to give different color palettes to different phases to make it clear to us whether we're in the past, the present, or the future. Instead, there's contextual story elements that it's like, oh, well, he's alive and obviously cogent, so therefore this must have been in the recent past or whatever. It was, oh my God, what a haunting, strange, wonderful story. I loved it deeply. And I don't know if it's just that I primed myself because the morning before I saw it, I was watching like explanations of the end of 2001. Maybe I'm going in Pollyanna on this, but this the director, same guy who did Ex Machina, loved Ex Machina, and I love the challenging nature of this work as well. It was great. It was great, Tom. It was great and haunting, and I am damaged permanently as a result of having watched it.
Oh.
If I had a criticism, it's that the shimmer, the part of the southern reach that is behind the shimmer, didn't look strange enough all the time. My sense from the book is that this thing is just upside down, and you get that sense. For instance, another moment where I immediately recognized is when they're going into the pool area, and they start with a wide shot. So that just as a moviegoer, like, oh, that's the pool, and you may start to piece together they were in a pool in the movie clip or the video clip that I just saw. But across the room, you see the splotch of color that you are going to shortly find out is the torn apart remains of the man you just saw in the video clip who has been eaten out from the inside. I immediately knew what that was just from the look of it. They nailed the look of it from what my mind's eye had seen. And to me, that's what the entire Southern Reach looked like. And, there's budget issues. You can't just redo every scene. And there are certain scenes where it's like, oh, it's just green foliage. That's a pretty picky thing to go after.
There is
and it's
one,
the only thing that bugged me.
There is one. Actually, you know what? Let me expand on that because luckily the movie does a good enough job of getting me past the bitter pill, which is everything about the setup of the movie is dumb as hell. The idea that, oh, we just can't figure out what's on the inside of the shimmer. And real quick to your point about the shimmer, not looking weird enough. It read to me as, if you're familiar with the Dark Tower series, I was like, oh, it's a thinny. Everything they showed is the way I thought of the thinny.
No, I meant inside. Like,
sure.
Get inside. Yeah.
But did you catch when they showed the few close-ups that they showed of the shimmer? Did you catch the what I assume are very intentional skull shapes that they showed? Because there was a lot of symmetrical, bisected Rorschach kind of images, and oftentimes they would create faces and
I just saw happy butterflies and unicorns.
Okay, all right.
Maybe you just saw skulls.
But pressing pause on how much I love this movie, dial it back to the practical aspects. Bunch of dumb stuff. You're telling me
why is the premise dumb? I'm curious about that because the premise did not seem dumb to me.
No. Well, you're thinking of the premise in terms of there being a thing that expands. The execution of the study of this thing is what doesn't make any sense to me.
Why doesn't that make sense?
Two things. Number one, when they go into the shimmer, we see them cross a black and white border, and they clearly have the capability to walk back at that point and report on what it's like 5% into the border and so on, right? We also know that the border is expanding. In fact, they go and they encounter an abandoned base. Why would you abandon the base if you know the base is going to be inside the Shimmer, the most valuable intel ever. Like, you don't need to go into the Shimmer. The Shimmer is coming to you. Why would you not outfit this base with weapons, with monitoring equipment, with food, with all the things that would blockade against all that stuff? None of that's addressed, and luckily they tell the story in such a way that I don't feel like it needs to be addressed, but it was a conscious decision for me to say, yeah, all right, it's not a story about how Brian would deal with this. It's a story of how this world is dealing with it.
I have answers to all those things, but I don't know if they're obvious from the movie.
Okay. So you feel
when
like
they first went into that border, the immediate next thing that happens is they cut forward multiple days that they've lost of time.
Not immediately, because you see a good 30
sequence,
seconds of them walking in, and that was enough to cast doubt on me, because we had to wait for each of the characters to walk around the corner so that they could do the scene change or whatever. But meanwhile, we also saw a definite scene where they went through this, permeable border or whatnot. So it implied. Plus, also, there's so many ways. The idea that only on the inside. It seems to me like what you do is if drones don't work, if these things don't work, then you tie look, man, I watch Poltergeist. You tie a rope around a dude, you have him go in and you yank him out, and there's a billion middle steps that are not acknowledged because that's not part of the story. The story is inside and outside.
The idea of turning around and going back out is acknowledged. It's dealt with directly, right? Gina Torres' character says we should just turn around right now, and Ventress is the one that undermines that. And to a certain extent, the Shimmer area, the Southern Reach area itself stops that from happening.
Sure. But again, all of that is getting into minutia. That's not the interesting story that they're trying to tell. And I liked the fact that they didn't even attempt to talk me out of that middle ground where it's like, hey man, are you in or are you out? And I decided to be in. And as a result, it was a really good experience.
I think that also maybe assumes that, like, if I think you're right in that it avoids talking about any of that, because I would just assume, given that set of statements, that maybe they tried all of that and none of it was interesting or helpful.
Yeah, this is an interesting point, just outside of Annihilation,
yeah.
And it's kind of set in contrast because I know the book. If a movie spends too much time explaining all the reasons that your objections aren't valid, it becomes dull.
Agreed.
So you have to find that balance between, I'm going to assume that you'll fill in the gaps here with a plausible scenario about why we didn't do X, Y, and Z so that we can get on with the story. And it sounds like you're like just on the acceptable side of that line of like, I didn't want to have to fill in X, Y, and Z because I would fill them in differently. But that's a conscious choice as a viewer, because I look at those things sometimes, not in this case, but in other times I'm like, well, I could come up with a story that would explain that. So I'm going to just kind of pretend that that's what they did and move on from there. Whereas you can approach movies and go, well, I'm going to come up with a story that undermines that, and now I'm not going to enjoy the movie.
Well, and there are certain movies that almost invite you to create those scenarios, and they self-destruct themselves. And we've talked about this before. I think of it as the Men in Black syndrome, where it's like, if you're going to construct a movie in the right way, you're going to get me on board with the utterly ridiculous conceit of Men in Black. Once that's possible, all of this is possible. This one was just a little bit soft in that it started to kind of give an explanation and maybe got deep enough that I saw there was a chasm there. And then they held out two pills and they're like, are you in or are you out? I'm like, okay, I'm in.
But the funny thing to me is there are really good explanations for most of what you said, and you haven't thought of them. And I can't decide if that's a flaw in the movie or not.
Yeah. Tell me this much. Are they addressed in the book?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, then now this makes me understand why fans of the book would be frustrated with the movie.
Yeah.
If all of that was because earlier that day, I tweeted quite randomly. I didn't know that there would be such a connection. I tweeted that, maybe it's just a fact of growing up in the Cold War that I saw both movies as a young man at the height of the Cold War, but I feel like 2010 is a better movie than 2001. Not that 2001 isn't a cinematography masterpiece, but as far as linear storytelling, 2010 was a better tale. The negative backlash I got from that was, of course, from Kubrick fans, but also from people who are like, but I had read the book and that movie is garbage compared to the book. And so I don't know. Or it's like the movie was missing so much of what was in the book.
I guess the upshot of all of this is it really depends on what you bring to a movie or TV show, how much you're going to enjoy it. And sometimes people pretend like they have no control over that and blame the movie. And to be honest, some of that is true. Like, you can't change who you are and how you experienced it. Brian can't change that he grew up in the Cold War, and that informs his opinion of 2010. But there are certain things that you can decide to do. And with Annihilation, I decided to come in saying there's no way they can film this book, and was delighted that they did. Versus me coming in saying, okay, I expect them to do all of these things from the book, and being disappointed that they didn't.
Can we talk about the hypnotic, strange, wonderful, bizarre vignettes that were written in this thing? I tweeted that I just wished, I wanted more than anything on the planet to be the one to turn that corner and discover the strange, living, human-like topiary of those, and to have a character come up to my surprise.
The deer with the flowers growing on their antlers, like, that is from my imagination.
Yeah.
And it became real, and I wanted to follow them. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, right? Like, I wanted to be, it was like, my first thought when I wake up from a dream is I want to go back. Even if it's an awful dream, I'm like, I want to know what's next. I want to go back there, wherever there is. And this movie managed to create that in me. So should we talk about the ending of the movie? How it all?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to go before we wrap this up, because again, not going to spoil anything about books, but this leaves a different sort of sequel possible, but also leaves it where they could just say, and you decide what truth is. Whereas if you read the books, there's a lot more to be said, both about how the Shimmer was created and what happened. There were some very important parts of the books that play into later books that were not in this movie, which makes me wonder how they would execute that, because they kind of have to catch you up somehow that way. Particularly the gap in the lighthouse that she goes into,
right,
connects on another end that was entirely left out of this movie, and everything around that, all the events around that end are left out of this movie. So I can't decide if they just were like, we're probably not going to make another one, so let's leave it with a are they, aren't they ending, or if they've decided that if they make another one, they're going to go in a different direction than the books.
I didn't think there was anything are they, aren't they about that ending. That ending was very clearly from the very beginning. First of all, fun fact, the moment you hear any character with some variation of Cain in his name, never a good guy. Never a good guy.
You are not able to think of them as a good guy.
Exactly, right? And I thought it was weird that they were like, Cain, like the moment I heard his name, I was like, that's not a good sign. And sure enough, by the time you get to the end, it's all but admitted by him. There's like a weird transitive property here. He admits that he doesn't think he's Cain. He says, "Are you Lena?" She doesn't answer. They hug. His eyes glow like the alien juice, and then her eyes glow like the alien juice.
Except we saw her beat her doppelganger.
I thought about this.
Did she just say that?
I thought about this a lot. There's one moment of disconnect in that final battle by beating her doppelganger. She goes to escape on the door. The doppelganger, the petroleum-covered suit guy, slams up against her. She loses consciousness. We have a black and white disconnect moment. And then she wakes up looking at what she perceives to be the doppelganger. And but in my mind, at that moment of conscious disconnection, we no longer know for sure whose story we're following. And I think from that point forward, we're following the alien story.
Well, and maybe the other possibility, because I see some people in the chat room saying, yeah, it seems pretty definitive to me. The other possibility is that, as you recall, she looked at her own blood and saw herself affected. So she might not be the doppelganger, but still have the glowy eyes from carrying the spore from the shimmer. And what does that mean if that's true? So could be either way.
You know what? If they were to come out, if they were to announce a sequel and say that's the story behind it, I'll buy into that. But I felt like the way they ended it was satisfying enough for me. This is one of those delightfully rare stories where the bad guys just win. And I love those. It's Rosemary's Baby. It's Planet of the Apes.
Are they bad?
As Natalie Portman says,
they're not things.
They're not bad. They're not destroying anything, only changing, you know?
Yeah.
But to me, as a human who wants to remain human, bad guys, wipe them off the map, throw a nuke them from orbit, only way to be sure.
Because when I go out and mow the lawn, I'm not a bad guy. I'm just mowing the lawn.
Genocidal time.
All right. Anything else on Annihilation?
No, it was just wonderful. Thank you so much to Bryce for encouraging me to go see it.
I'm glad you went and saw it.
Did you have any thoughts, Bryce, on anything we missed?
I think we touched on most everything.
I did want to ask Tom, since you read the book, those set pieces, was that just brilliant artistic interpretation, or in the book, did it describe a gazelle with flowers out of his head, plants that look like humans?
Some of them are wholly invented. Most of them are from the book. Some of them are changed from the book. For instance, the screaming is from the book, but not by that particular creature. I feel like, if I'm remembering right, that they created that wolf, rat, bear thing.
It was that was a great moment.
But there are things like that for sure. The gazelle's totally from the book. Like, that is bird imagery on my mind. All right, let's move on to Counterpart. How'd you feel about this episode?
It's good. It's good. It's always good.
Good. All right.
This was
thanks everybody for watching.
This was a transformative episode for me because until this episode, I had held on to as we got our footing between the two different worlds and the differences thereof. I was unsure. Like, I didn't want to fall into the trap of making the obvious assumption that this is East and West Germany. By this episode, episode 6, 7?
6.
6. I'm like, okay, it's definitely East and West Germany. You have one that's technologically more advanced, culturally diverse, more socially liberal and permissive, where anything goes. The other one,
is it technologically more advanced? What makes you say that?
Very the fact that. Remember the 3 assassins that made it through? Yeah. One of them goes downstairs, clearly does not know how to use an iPhone camera.
Has that just a UI difference? We've seen high-tech phones in the other side.
Okay, flash forward when we see Alexander Pope. He's got this very carefully arranged set of cell phones, all of them clamshell 2004 style phones.
But that's what burner phones look like.
It was also when they had that big lunch meeting between the two worlds, and the guy, his iPhone goes off, and it's like an offense to the other piece. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's just a purity thing of like, we're not supposed to see each other's tech.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. I will disagree with you if you want to say that they're both technologically advanced. Because keep in mind the historical perspective, as I'm sure you're well aware, the Eastern Bloc was more interested in big, ostentatious designs, like because that's the one thing you see about, and I'm going to start calling it East Germany. When you see East Germany, they've got these giant spiral, fancy architecture. That's all conventional 20th century modernist period, advanced stuff. Like I can see doing all that without any advanced technology. So at any rate, I am now firmly feeling like Prime world is just East Germany, and our world, air quotes, is West Germany. Weirdly, collapsing that singularity made it much, much easier for me to follow everything. I enjoyed the various elements of the story. The star of the show, for two reasons, is that scene when our Howard, takes the lie detector test. Not only because it's great to watch him confidently go in and say, I don't know, knowing that he could tell the truth because they got nothing on him, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, the person administering the lie detector test, wasn't that one of the guys from Utopia? One of the main characters from Utopia?
You may be right. Yeah.
Doggone it.
If I'd have thought, I didn't even think about it. I would have looked it up on IMDb.
He's the one that loses his eye early on.
But this is also the boyfriend of Emily, so that's what I've been thinking.
No. Sorry. Not the. Sorry, you're thinking of the guy that drags Howard down. I'm talking about the tech that runs the machine.
Oh, the tech guy. I didn't even notice.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll see if we can find that. But at any rate, I continue to totally dig it. And of course, the big twist is that mole guy knows that there's a mole, and this is the big reveal where it's like we've seen his father-in-law. We know that he's married into this position. We know that he's shallow and loves his hookers and so on. And yet somehow they were able to constantly, for the past few episodes, refer to his wife without ever showing her to us. And then we reveal it's the one who has an intimate connection to the assassin character, and that she's the actual mole.
Yeah. I love this series and enjoyed this episode, but there is something I've noticed sometimes on these 10 to 13 episode story arcs that we get now, called the episode 6 syndrome or episode 7 syndrome, where I kind of feel like, oh, if I'm not binging, I just want to get through it. I know we need to know these things, and I just want to get through it. Especially weird for me to say that, given this was such a twist ending, such a reveal ending, and I didn't see it coming. It all coalesced into place, but instead of feeling like joyous shock, like, oh my gosh, I felt like, oh, I guess I should have been paying more attention to her as a plot line.
And you're not wrong, Tom. It's really, I don't think it's out of line for me to say it's kind of unfair. I think about the number of people who put so much effort into the artistic integrity of this piece of work, and they know as they're creating it, the vast majority of everybody who watches it will watch it straight through. And yet the first timers, the early adopters, are going to be put through the punishment of this 1 week delay between episodes.
I don't even know if it's vast majority, maybe 50-50. Like most shows that are released week to week, people do watch week to week. It's the long tail that binges, unless it's like a Netflix or an Amazon.
Sure. At any rate, what a challenging thing for the people who make this stuff, because of the two of us, I watched it with Bryce shortly before the show, and of the two of us, only I recognized who the person was and Bryce was, and then there's other moments that I said, Bryce, pause it. Is this the guy from so-and-so? And he's like, yeah, it is, and so on. I strongly recommend having a viewing buddy if you're going to go week to week.
Yeah, it was last week or one of these weeks where we talked about the show on Spoilerin Time, sans you, Brian, where talking with Tom about it in depth really made me understand the show a lot better. I think the show is got so many false fronts and just so many abstractions that I think it's hard to follow. Even though the underlying plot is just a pretty standard spy story.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's a big thing to keep track of.
Yeah.
I do love two things about this particular episode. One is that we continue to see our Howard get more confidence, like you mentioned, and start to be able to act like Howard Prime. And we see a more compassionate, sentimental side of Howard Prime, in relation to his friend's wife and comforting her and trying to help her while keeping her out of danger basically for the honor of his friend. So that's a really cool continuing story arc. And I like that, with that twist ending, we didn't get a nice clean twist. Everyone thinks that he did it. Everyone suspects he's the mole, and it's going to be difficult for him to convince them otherwise, because why would it be his wife? And that not being a nice clean scenario intrigues me more. That's more fun.
Yeah. Hey, do you feel like Alexander Pope is a threatening character? I don't feel like we've seen his tendrils do awful things, but I don't know that I'm afraid of him like I feel like I should be.
I know what you're saying, and I feel like I'm not supposed to fear him that way. That his superpower is to lure you into underestimating him. And so I keep saying, but we know he's more powerful than that. We know he's not the retiring priestly figure that he appears to be.
Yeah, I feel like they're setting us up for kind of like Yondu, where it's like, this is your short-term bad guy, and then we'll find out who the real bad guy is, and suddenly you'll be glad Alexander Pope's on your side. But I don't know who I don't have any other bad guys outside of Pope.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, he doesn't feel like the top of the pyramid. Definitely not.
Yeah, right? Okay.
Yep.
All
right. Let's finish off with Deadwood, episode 10 of season 1. Poor Swearingen. Turns out they want even more money from him.
Did you notice that the beginning and the ending of this episode both began with discussions about friendship and what a true friend is?
No, I didn't notice that. You're right.
So they begin by having dinner, and the Principal Rooney says, "Hey, we should officially declare our friendship by making a club." And everyone's like, "Yeah, about that."
Yeah.
And then yet at the end, 2/3 of that same party, upon finding the Reverend in such a bad place that he doesn't even recognize them. They say, no, we are your friends, and we're going to walk you to your tent. And he says, a midnight stroll with friends. What could be better, right?
Yeah. How poetic. That is total bookends. You're right.
Right. I didn't notice that. We also see Swearingen is such a damned interesting character, because he, in so many ways, I understand everything, and yet we get to see him be a bad guy. We watch him straight up murder a dope fiend. Granted, you could say that tactically this was the right move on the chessboard and all of that stuff, but it reminds us that I keep going back to that metaphor of the Hulk. Like, he's powerful, not a good guy, but also very honest, very direct.
That's the thing, right? I feel so much differently about Swearingen murdering the dope fiend than I do about Psy murdering the con artists.
Yeah, that's
because
the difference.
Psy enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And Psy did it somewhat unnecessarily and unfairly. Swearingen did it very practically. He may not have been humanitarian per se, although he tried a couple of times to make it easier. But really, it was like, you know what? Sorry, I have to do this. Not going to not do it. But, I'd rather not, but I have to.
The weirdest part to me is to see what a generous and savvy diplomat Al Swearingen is. He goes to the filthiest, I'm using air quotes for all of this, to the filthiest, least approved of chunk of Deadwood, walks in among all the Chinese laborers, and then immediately starts barking about how intimidated he is by Wu, going in, and then walks out claiming he got taken for a ride because and explains what he's doing, all that.
He is not more racist than most either.
Oh, sure. In fact,
Wu walks in through the front door and everybody's like, you need to turn around and come back in the back door, Swearingen's like, you know what? Forget it. It doesn't matter. Just bring him out. I don't have time to obey your stupid formalities. And
it's weird to say this about Al Swearingen. Very progressive for his time.
Sort of. Although I think it's the same thing as the killing. It's not because he's not racist. It's that it's just not important to him to be racist.
He's practical. He knows what matters. And oh my God, how much did you just want to punch the face of Farnham, walking around, strutting around, cocking the walk? I'm the mayor. Ugh.
And you knew that was coming. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah. Also, back to the Reverend too. Another example of Swearingen's humanity is the first time the Reverend comes in, he handles it very quietly.
That's right.
And just you know what? I'll make you an arrangement. Don't worry about it. Second time, he's just like, something's got to be done because this guy, it's not him. I'm not even talking to him anymore because it doesn't do any good.
Yeah.
And the Reverend is just so heartbreaking. It is such a poignant portrayal of the decline of a person's health beyond their own capacity to even understand it. It's just chilling.
And Doc's presence continues to be he's pure heart. He's pure. I'm just here to make people better, and I'm going to tell you the truth, or not the truth, if that's what will bring the most comfort. Right? Take care of people. This was a particularly good one in that it was a study in Al Swearingen and the why of what he does. That whole storytelling unfolding of the two of them drawing pictures and using hand gestures and emoting to tell the story of who does what, and the respect that despite massive language barriers, the two of them clearly come to an understanding, is wonderful. It's wonderful. And I 100% believe that that's how it was back in the 19th century.
Because Wu is the Swearingen of his community. He is not beloved. He is not protecting his people. He rides roughshod over them the same way Swearingen rides roughshod over his people.
Yeah, but he is respected.
He is respected, but not because of who he is, but because of what he could do.
Correct. All of that. Man, it's I do believe I've seen up through this episode. I think we may be in new territory starting from here forward. But man, oh man, the hardest part of my week is waiting an entire week for the next Deadwood. If you have the means, I highly recommend you just binge the hell out of it and enjoy.
I'm looking forward to finding out a little more about this person that Swearingen killed that made him flee to Deadwood, and how he's hoping he can figure that out from a distance, and how he gets double crossed. We'll legitimize Deadwood, but turns out we won't legitimize you unless you give us more money.
Quick side tangent. I really enjoyed the messenger in this. He seemed like a younger version of Swearingen. Somebody who
is he not the guy from Lost who plays the evil side of...
Oh, it does look like him. I don't know. He reminds me of Wolverine's brother from the Wolverine. I don't know if man, I should learn my Hollywood.
I just keep I keep IMDb by me most of the time. I just didn't look him up this time. It's all there. If only we had an interconnected network of networks.
Regardless, I do like the strange. It is a weird thing for Al Swearingen to immediately invite in as a confidant this person to his domestic disputes and the chess game that is happening in there. And I like that he did that, both for the fact from a storytelling element that he could spell out exactly for the home viewer what's going on, but also that is tactically a smart move for him if he's trying to curry favor and support and respect and belief from, these bribable elements.
Yeah. Well, folks, hope you're enjoying watching along with us. And if you would like to keep this show coming and even possibly get a more accessible version of our back episodes where we talk about these different shows, head to patreon.com/Cordkillers. Just kick us $1. You'll barely even notice. It means the world to us and helps us do the show. And we'll see you next time.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.